Sing Spirit of Life together. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. I love to read aloud, so just let yourself rest, relax in the chair. I wrote this story in 2012. This is called Wendell Takes a Vow. Wendell was an odd child, they all thought, and it made many of them uncomfortable. He was homeschooled like a number of the other children in their fundamentalist Christian church, but he didn't exactly do what the other children did. He didn't participate in the patriotic speech competitions, didn't take to memorizing scripture. He never stood for the national anthem. And whenever someone turned on Rush Limbaugh, well, he would quietly leave the room, go outside, climb the trees, or study snails in the grass. Wendell's idea of homeschooling was maybe something more like no schooling, for heaven's sake. He didn't seem to do anything. He ignored assignments and group activities, and most of the congregation's adults were powerless to discipline or even direct him. His poor mother was of no use. Ever since Wendell's older brother Patrick was killed while fighting in Afghanistan, she didn't seem any good for anything. A wash rag, her husband said. She's like an old wash rag. She didn't go shopping anymore. She didn't cook, wouldn't clean or do laundry. She stopped praying. Everything. The only reason Wendell's mother even went to church anymore was because her husband wasn't about to let her get away with not going. That left Wendell pretty much alone to design his own educational experience. So he read whatever interested him, which was to say, everything. If the question was ever asked, "Where's Wendell?" one of three answers would suffice: reading at the library, reading in his room, or reading in the woods. No, truth be told, in the woods, his books were just as often closed. When he was out there, the woods became the book. During the short 10 years that Wendell had walked in this particular body on this earth, he had read considerably more than most adults, and actually more than everyone else in his church combined. Yet curiously, when Reverend Ketchell mentioned this voracious appetite to the boy one day, Wendell instantly responded, with no hesitation whatsoever, "What we need ultimately can be found in no book." This raised the preacher's eyebrows, made him catch his breath. He felt marginally relieved, though, as Wendell, on leaving the room, added quietly, "Some books, still, can sometimes help us see our way." Wendell didn't like to see anyone suffer, and it's possible that his afterthought here was a way of throwing the pastor a bone. Or maybe he just meant what he said. Wendell read science and physics and molecular biology and string theory, and he read religion and philosophy, the Bible, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Vedas, the Talmud, the Lankavatara Sutras, Gandhi. He read all of Tolstoy, including his essays on nonviolence and civil disobedience, Meister Eckhart, the Transcendentalists, Albert Einstein, and Albert Camus. He'd read, too, the poets and mystics, Walt Whitman, Yeats, Mirabai, Lala, Rabindranath Tagore, Rumi, Kabir, Rilke, Pablo Neruda, Antonio Machado, Lorca, Hart Crane, Hafiz, Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, Ramana Maharshi, Rabia, Tukaram, William Blake, and he was, after all, a 10-year-old boy. He'd read all of Tolkien and the Hogwarts books, too. While it wasn't Wendell's intention, all of this studiousness put up a wall between the boy and his father. His father often proudly said, "Well, I've only ever read but one book." And while he was referring to the Bible, it was never clear how much of that book he'd ever actually read. He didn't seem to really know anything about it. One day in a conversation, Wendell was overheard to say, "What you do to the least of my brethren, that you do also to me." Wendell's father irritably addressed the air with the question, "Where does he get this stuff?" Wendell was quiet. He wasn't crazy about small talk, and if he didn't have something to say, then he didn't say much. Usually he'd walk into the church and just kind of witness what was going on. Sometimes he'd write a note to himself, slip it into his pocket, and back out of the room to return to the leaves and the snails. His odd behavior made some of the congregation wonder in whispers if he wasn't growing up to be a liberal. Wendell had been chosen, along with 2 other children, to make a short presentation in front of the congregation on Mother's Day Sunday. As with the other 2, Wendell was encouraged to just say a few words, dear, about why Jesus gave us mothers. It was Mrs. Colson, on behalf of the RE committee, who chose the 3 children as presenters. Mrs. Colson chose Wendell because she believed that if he said something really sweet, right there in front of everyone, about his mother, that maybe she would be cured of her grief and that she'd stop being so morose all the time, maybe even go shopping again. And that then Wendell would be a hero too, just like his brother Patrick, who died in the dust in Afghanistan. Mrs. Colson believed that since Jesus died for our sins, and if we're the good people who are saved in his name, as opposed to those who aren't, that it's okay for us to do anything at all, anything, and Jesus will forgive us, the good people. It doesn't exactly say this anywhere in the Bible, but it can be spun to look tasty that way. And it's much easier to accept that as the central teaching of Christianity, that Jesus will do your work for you while you lounge around, rather than to do the considerably more difficult labor of loving one another, which is the actual central teaching of Christianity, and which puts the load squarely on our shoulders. But maybe I'm getting off the path. Anyway, Mrs. Colson believed this because she'd been taught to believe it, and because it made her feel comfortable and off the hook. Officially, Wendell's brother died on the battlefield nobly, but the truth was not so noble. Patrick died when he was cracked on the back of the neck by a 14-year-old Afghani boy with the dysfunctional butt end of a discarded M16A2 rifle that had been made by American hands in an American arms manufacturing plant in Duluth. Patrick had not been wearing his combat helmet at the time. He'd often disobeyed instructions to do so. Too hot, he'd say. The boy killed Patrick in retaliation because Patrick had just gunned down the boy's entire family inside their house as they were preparing for sleep. Patrick did this because he was taught to believe that these people were the enemy and therefore evil. So now his helmetless head opened like a melon, and he died. Mrs. Colson didn't know that Patrick died while killing civilians, but had she known, she would have told Wendell and Patrick's mother that it was all right, that he'd acted for freedom and democracy, and that Jesus would forgive. Patrick was, after all, just following orders. She's pretty sure. There was a sign above the door of their church. It said, "Fear the Lord." That sign always made Wendell laugh, this little 10-year-old kid. Which is saying a lot because Wendell didn't often laugh, not publicly. Some of the congregants of the New Sacred Gospel Church said that Wendell didn't exactly have a sense of humor. Still, that sign, "Fear the Lord," a sign like that always made Wendell laugh. On Sunday mornings, as the crowd would walk across the threshold under those words, Wendell would just crack up. And people never quite knew what to do with that. Why was that boy laughing? Did we mention that Wendell was kind of an odd child? Not only did he read most of the time, but he never even really watched television. What kind of a kid is that? The few times he tried to appease his father's idea of family time, he'd fall asleep after 10 minutes, or he'd become enthralled by the little red bugs crawling around the potted plants on the windowsill. Wendell never did understand anyway why they wanted him to watch TV. Even that Fox network, which spun the news exactly the way the congregation liked it, still ran endless shocking reality shows with half-naked, airheaded quasi-celebrities and people competing to eat worms, and sexy vampire shows, and even absurdly salacious comedy shows about gay people, who in its political life, that network actively sought to disenfranchise at every turn. And yet most of the congregation, approving of none of that, would tune in nightly and grumble about this perpetual train wreck. And then they'd submit themselves to the train wreck again the next night and grumble some more. Wendell thought this was all rather strange. He did occasionally, though. He did occasionally like to watch Marx Brothers movies that he'd borrowed from the library. The Marx Brothers were absolutely brilliant, Wendell thought, though to his father they were anti-authoritarian and tantamount to pornography. Why did Groucho's eyes roll around like that? It just wasn't exactly wholesome. And what did he mean when he said things like, "Room service? Send up another room." And whoever named it necking was a poor judge of anatomy. And if I held you any closer, I'd be on the other side of you. What does that mean? Wendell's father wanted to know. What does it mean? But to Wendell, it was all magic and mysticism. The Marx Brothers displayed, in the most comical of terms, the very mysteries of the universe. When a man down on his luck approached the mute Harpo in the street, his hand extended, saying, "Hey, buddy, can you help me get a cup of coffee?" Harpo responded with obvious and immediate compassion. He reached down into the pocket of his baggy pants and produced a steaming cup of coffee balanced on its saucer. A single moment like that contained far more spiritual instruction than 100 hours of Reverend Ketchell's endless pulpit rantings. And the way the Marx Brothers mastered words, the angels and the poets would bow down and sigh. Wendell could easily see Chico Marx and Jesus Christ trading parables and slapping their knees for eons on end. And when Harpo would sit down to play that harp, even with his eyes bugging out from under his crumpled top hat, the heavens would open for Wendell. And he could see, actually see, the music cascading down through the cosmos, falling in strangely beautiful algorithmic splendor from Harpo's deft fingertips, sending Wendell into a delirious state of bliss as the strings vibrated through the top of his 10-year-old skull, and all the ancient stardust fell down upon Harpo's luminous curls. All magic and mysticism, and not exactly fundamentalist fare. So one night, a week before Mother's Day, while 84% of the congregation of the New Sacred Gospel Church were all snug in their homes, awash in blue light, and grumbling over the primetime train wreck, for the record, 0% were watching the Marx Brothers. Wendell and his mother were out walking barefoot in the meadow on the edge of the woods, under a sliver of buttery moon. Wendell's mother wore a simple pullover frock, walking beside her son. It's pretty much what she wore most of the time now. She really didn't have much interest in fashion these days, a kind of catatonia being her constant countenance now. Though Wendell was a small boy, if anyone had chanced to see the two walking in the meadow, hand in hand, appearances would surely indicate that he was the adult, not his mother. Wendell simply led the way. He loved her. They talked, well, or rather, Wendell talked about the canals of Venice and how that city was slowly sinking, about the great Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, and about the process of making yogurt out of goat's milk. He wondered aloud what a tiny pink kangaroo fetus might think about as it makes the laborious journey that every pink kangaroo fetus must make as it climbs out of its mother's vagina and makes its treacherous way up the furry expanse of her belly to arrive at last in the pouch where it can rest and grow snugly. He talked too about the paintings of Diego Rivera and about the mathematical structure of a particular Vivaldi concerto, as it would lay itself out visibly in his unconscious mind at night while he was dreaming, and so on. They sat down together on a small rise in the meadow and gazed upon the 100 million stars that glowed in the black velvet above them. Wendell said, "You know, Mama, I'm supposed to talk about Mother's Day on Sunday, but, I don't really feel like talking to them." They were like two aliens from some distant planet that nobody else knew how to get to. His mother became that alien as a result of a harsh and meaningless violence. And Wendell, well, Wendell had just always been that way. She looked into her son's face, and if there was anything she could still grasp in this material world, catatonic as she was, it was the beauty in Wendell's face. "When I think about you, Mama, I feel gratitude. Not just because you're so-and-so, born to so-and-so, who went to school and then grew up and in some hospital somewhere gave birth to this creature called Wendell and then spent X amount of time making him peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. These personalities of ours, They're just like those transparent shells that locusts leave behind, anchored to tree bark in the dead heat of August. Together they grew very quiet for some time. Wendell braided his mother's hair, and then he said, "Mama, look at those stars up there. You know, more than half of them aren't even there anymore. They burned out thousands of years ago. Yet the light, Mama, the light is still there. You and me, Mama, we're like those stars. You know, next to water, your body is made up mostly of ancient stardust. These meat machines that we travel around in, ancient recycled stardust. So it's okay with me, Mama, if you don't ever want to talk again. That's all right. Daddy doesn't get it. Pastor Ketchel, all those people at the church, they don't get it." And then Wendell became very intense, speaking right into the gland in the center of his mother's forehead. He said, "When I look at you, Mama, I see the mother, the great mother, the one who births us over and over throughout time, who sets us on fire so that we really live, the one who turns the great wheel so that we really live. That's who I see when I look at you, Mama, even as I bow down before you now." And he did. He bowed down to his mother. They held hands, mother and son, for a long, long time, their eyes feasting on all the swirling universe. At last, Wendell said, "You know, Mama, I likely won't always be here, but like those stars, I'll be here. Are you all right with that, Mama?" Wendell's mother looked directly into his eyes, her own welling up with marvelous tears. And then she said the first word she'd spoken in 2.5 years. Her face beamed with a great beauty, and she said, "Yes." A week later, on Mother's Day morning, a curious hush fell over the congregants as they stood before the portal of the church. They weren't sure if they should enter. No one knew how it happened, but somehow someone had painted a slash through the words, "Fear the Lord," and they replaced those words with, "Fear nothing, be humble, love all." You might think you know who did it, but honestly, no one knew how it happened. Wendell saw the new words up there, and he just cracked up. After a while, of course, everyone did go inside, and halfway through the service, the 3 children were called forward to make their presentations. The first child to speak was Brittany, a lithe, self-confident, bright-eyed girl who looked her audience in the eye and said, "M is for my mom. O is for, oh, how beautiful," and so on, spelling out her mother's virtues. She ended with a vivacious, "I think Mother's Day is great." Then it was Kurt's turn. Awkward, puffy-eyed, shirt tail not quite tucked in, nervously he read from a sheet of yellow paper, "I love my mom on Mother's Day because she keeps the house neat, washes my clothes, and makes me good dishes like burgers with mac and cheese," and that sort of thing. Kurt didn't actually look like someone who cared much for neat houses or clean clothes, but the mac and cheese was believable. When he was finished reading, someone could be heard whispering audibly, "Attaboy, Kurt," as if Kurt had just slid into home plate. As Wendell climbed up to the podium, this church used podiums because pulpits were more for Catholics. You could hear his father gulp, almost heard his heart flop like a carpfish onto the floor. But Wendell's mother was looking at her son. Usually in church, she would sit with a dull gaze staring at the carpet, but not this morning. You may not be aware, Wendell began, that Mother's Day was started in 1870 by Julia Ward Howe. She was an anti-slavery abolitionist and a women's suffragette who was also wholly committed to activism in the peace movement. In fact, when she started the holiday, it was originally called Mother's Peace Day. Wendell continued, the name was probably shortened by some government bureaucrat for reasons of thrift. Wendell didn't actually clear his throat here. He phonetically said the word and bounced his eyebrows a few times, in a way that would make Groucho proud. Though almost no one got the joke, Wendell's joy in delivering it was in no way diminished. Wendell read Howe's Mother's Peace Day proclamation poem, emphasizing phrases like, "We will not have questions answered by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands will not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. And we, the women of one country, will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." And she said, "Disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not the balance of justice." It was easy to see just how much Wendell loved this poem. He went on, "I've been thinking about the idea of mother lately, which also led me to think about Jesus, who understood the idea of mother very well. And that's also led me to think about war. And that's led me to want to take a vow." Wendell said, "God, is both male and female." The crowd fell into a dead, scandalized silence. "And paradoxically," he went on, "God is neither male nor female, all in the same moment. But there's a truth beyond anybody's concept of God or design of Heavenly Father or Great Mother, and within that truth, all those concepts and dogmas are contained, but they are tiny and insignificant by comparison. Let's face it," Wendell said, "we would be wise and, yes, wisely humbled if we realized that our little human words won't serve us here in a moment like this." Still, today is Mother's Day. So if we're going to talk about mother, Wendell said, let's really talk about mother. In the tongues of Jesus' time and locale, both Hebrew and Aramaic, Shekinah, the Holy Spirit, was feminine, was the mother. When she spoke through Jesus, when the mother spoke through Jesus, she said, "Love one another as you would love me. The kingdom of heaven is within you." And how about this one from the Gospel of Philip? "I don't think it's ever been spoken in this church before," he said. Quote, "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left are one. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. For this reason, each one will dissolve into its original nature. But those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble, eternal. Unquote. Wendell goes on. We suffer deeply in our culture now, he said, because we don't recognize the mother. We have forgotten her entirely. Do we need evidence of this forgetfulness? There are some people now who are offended by the sight of a mother breastfeeding her child, and who, if we let them, they'll call this public obscenity. The mother is seriously absent here, and we should rise and speak on her behalf. There were some very red faces in the assembly by now. A 10-year-old talking about paradox and translating Aramaic was one thing, but breasts? In church? Wendell continued. We train young people to kill and slaughter, and to do so under orders and without conscience. And for this lack of conscience, we call them heroes? Why do we not rise up on behalf of the mother? And I am sorry to have to say to Mother Julia Ward Howe, he went on, that after all these years of struggle, the one and only area of women's equality that has been enthusiastically and happily awarded more than a token response is on the battlefield. Women are now considered equal to men in one area. They can kill and violate and slaughter. They are more than welcome, officially as support, to bloody their hands and stain their souls. And the mother, the dear, tender, great mother, waits silently for us to rise and speak on her behalf. And worse, he said, now we kill from afar impersonally with unmanned drones. And then we wonder why those who operate these drones by remote control in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away, we wonder why they are losing their minds and their souls. Oh my God. The mother is calling on us to arise and retrieve those poor, wretched souls, our souls. I know some of you don't want to hear what I have to say, Wendell acknowledged, but it wasn't my idea to stand up here this morning. Don't you understand? God doesn't care about religions or nations or dogmas or structures or punishments or laws. That's all born of ego, and God doesn't have one. That's the struggle you're faced with. You all operate from a place of ego, and God won't be found there. Unlike you and me, God has no ego to offend, he said. God simply doesn't care about ranting TV preachers, about all these insignificant details, who's right and who's wrong. God is simply waiting for you to grasp the mystery of love. Both science and religion are meaningless, worthless, if they don't lead us to a deeper understanding of love. But the small, corrupt minds of power mongers and modern-day Pharisees don't want you to be thinking about that. They'd rather have you arguing amongst yourselves than doing anything truly spiritual, like putting an end to war or noticing the poor. Forget ego, Wendell said. Just love everyone without reserve. So, Wendell concluded, I arise to make this vow. Since no one else is ending war, since politicians and profiteers won't do it, we must do it ourselves. We are the only ones who can. I arise on behalf of the mother this morning, on behalf of love itself. Wendell said, I arise and invite any man or woman or child anywhere in the world to take this vow with me. Indeed, I foresee a time when many, many will. I vow that I will never, under any circumstances, violate my own soul by doing violence to another. I will never take up arms against or do harm to any other religion, not in service to any other, not in service to my own singular ego, nor in service to any nation or religion, nor any other irrelevant agency. My vow is to love alone. Happy Mother's Day, Wendell said. The most beautiful, compassionate, tender gaze in his eyes. And then slowly, the boy, for he was now something more than, something other than Wendell. Slowly, the boy seemed to dissolve into the ether. He became the breath, just breath. He became stardust moving through that breath, moving out over the congregation, between the flowing strands of their hair, through their open mouths, across their silent tongues. Wendell's mother arose. One by one, the mothers arose. So the closing words are pretty simple. Sometimes when leading writing retreats or other gatherings, and I lead groups of people in sitting meditation, which we did just a tiny taste of that a little earlier. The phrase that kind of keeps arising on my tongue is that, when you're moving into stillness and silence in this meditative practice, to begin to comprehend this idea that everything in this life, whether it is joyful or tragic, everything in this life that we experience is going to pass by like the clouds above our heads. So if something's difficult, you just keep breathing, and the clouds will pass by eventually. So that phrase comes up a lot when I'm leading the meditation, and then I wrote this lullaby for my children, and I'd like to give it to you now as our closing. And don't worry if you fall asleep. I have a little bell here I can ring later on, and I'll wake you up. I'll come around. Where rivers of milk and sweet nectar flow, there to the land of honey we'll go. And I'll kiss your forehead where the visions do grow. Let the world pass by like clouds, my love. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. And I'll be on that mountain with sheep's cheese and bread, and a warm tasseled nightcap for your wee nodding head. There on that mountain of dreams be ye fed, and let the world pass by like clouds, my love. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. Don't worry for ogres, don't worry for trolls, for even ones such as these do have souls. Oh, harm may come, but harm slips through holes. Let the world pass by like clouds, my love. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. Abide in stillness, in tenderness, bow. In the morning you'll open your eyes. We'll wander in wonder down the path, but for now, let the whole world gently pass by. Miraculous angel, miraculous dove, how much you have shown me of the mystery of love. Oh, breathe in my arms as the stars sigh above, and let the world pass by like clouds, my love. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. Let the world pass by like clouds, my love. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. Let the whole world pass by like clouds. Let the whole world pass by